want to welcome you to this memorial service for our friend Gary Fleishacker. This is not supposed to happen. And thank you for coming here. As you can see, it's not a typical setting for a memorial. We have all these beautiful drawings up on the wall, and we're in the town hall where Gary was on the board, and you might even see a fire truck come by, but that's not for us. It's just life goes on, and they're doing a drill tonight. So I'm Catherine Curran, and I am a friend of and colleague of Gary's, and we're assembled here today to remember the life and mark the death of Gary Fleishacker. He had an impact on all of us, so we take this brief time to recognize his death. He was 71 years old when pancreatic cancer took him from our midst. Gary would not have wanted us to make a big fuss, so we'll keep the observance today simple and sweet, and with some time for reflection. So there will be order, there's an order to the service, you probably see that in the program that you have, but we'll put a little time for some silence in between some of the things that we're going to do, just so we can have this gathered space together. One of the things I want to do is, read the obituary. Many of you have probably read it, but in this part of the service, we recognize Gary and just call him to mind. And so I'm going to do that with two readings, and this is the first one. Gary Fleishacker died peacefully at his home at Medicine Lake on July 11, 2019, after living with pancreatic cancer with courage, acceptance, and grace the last 9 months. Born in Pierre, South Dakota on August 10, 1947, to J.C., also known as Fly, and Dorothy Fleishacker, Gary graduated from Riggs High School in Pierre, University of South Dakota, and University of Iowa, where he obtained a PhD. He worked for FMC, Unisys, formerly known as Sperry, and Latitudes Group as a training and organization development consultant. He participated in many professional and community service organizations, along with enjoying music, dancing, golfing, boating, and sailing, travel, and the everyday moments of life. He celebrated 40 years of marriage to Ann Sturdivant on July 4, 2019, surrounded by a large group of friends and family, and leading a musical jam session with his singing and guitar playing. He is survived by his wife, Ann Sturdivant of Medicine Lake, daughter, Tammy Fries, and husband, John of Burnsville, son, John Fleishacker of St. Paul, grandchildren, Benjamin, Nicholas, Natalie, Andrew, and Joseph Fries of Burnsville, brother, Alan Fleishacker, and wife, Pat of Houston, nephews, Evan Fleishacker and Colin Fleishacker, both of Tulsa, Oklahoma, ex-wife Ellen Dixon Fleishacker of Rapid City, South Dakota, and many wonderful friends, neighbors, and acquaintances for whom he was very thankful. In lieu of flowers, donations may be sent to the Pancreatic Cancer Action Network. So that was Gary's obituary. And since it was mentioned, these drawings, this butcher paper was from their 40th wedding anniversary party, and it details many of the things that they've done over their lives together. So at the end, we'll ask you're free to take a look at this and see all of the beautiful things. And then the pictures, and these are his growing up years down the wall. The one other thing I want to read to you is something that Gary himself posted on Caring Bridge during this time. And it informs what we're doing here tonight. Much of my sense of spirituality has always been rooted in nature. And I think of my current journey in some way as coming back to the earth and the common forces of the universe. A friend sends out weekly quotes, and this week's was from Luther Standing Bear, a Lakota sage. The old Lakota was wise. He knew that a man's heart, away from nature, becomes hard. He knew that a lack of respect for growing, living things soon led to a lack of respect for humans too. So he kept his children close to nature's softening influence. In the last few weeks, we've watched a family of foxes with 4 kids play in our yard. We put up a wood duck house and had at least one pair check it out. Our new bird feeder is attracting lots of gold and purple finches, cardinals, juncos, chickadees, and others, colorful and camouflaged. There are little purple flowers sprouting in the newly green lawn, and most of the bushes we planted last summer have buds. Paying attention to such examples of nature's softening influence helps me appreciate our life on this earth and the bond between us all, one day at a time. So we're just going to have a moment of silence here. In the past week, people frequently referred to Gary as kind and gentle, as well as funny. Several neighbors, friends, and colleagues have stories to tell about how we showed up in the world, and I'll ask you to come up here one at a time. So first we have Bert Martinez, who is a neighbor.
It is for me an honor. It is for me an honor to speak in this occasion. It's really an honor. Thank you so much. Gary was a humble man of multiple facets, some of them unknown to me, like his proficiency in music, his academic achievements, like his PhD, his professional expertise, and many more that he never flaunted. He was certainly a humble man. I will recollect some of my experiences here in this city hall, where he served 29 years in the Planning Commission. I first met Gary when I came to serve in the Planning Commission, and Gary was the chairman. He not only welcomed me, but he coached me. He supported me through the years in his very special, gentle way. Even if he was a chairman, he never used his position to impose his ideas in the rest of us. He never put down any other member's ideas or opinions. He just acted like any other member. He always listened to other ideas with respect, and even if they did not match his, he always expressed his opinion in a very soft-spoken demeanor. I think he hated to be a chairman. And to be in this limelight, even in this small city. We used to call it the frying pan. as all the members of the Planning Commission present here remember. But in his case, this was just another sample of the humble man he was. I want to mention to you a trick that Gary played on me as a novice member of the Planning Commission. One day, after I had missed a previous meeting, I found myself nominated as a chair of the commission. And Gary told me, well, we held a special election in the last meeting, and you were not here to defend yourself. Later on, and after I left the Planning Commission to serve in the City Council, which he encouraged me to do, he established what was known as the rotating chair, where each member had the opportunity to serve 1 or 2 months at a time. But always, at the end, Gary was the beacon with his vision for our city. In closing, I want to thank Gary and his family that shared with us for the opportunity to have known him. Thank you for those 29 years of service to the Planning Commission that has definitely changed our city. And to be known that with more people like Gary, we could have a better world. Safe travels, friend.
Next is Ellen Lindahl, friend of Gary's.
I've known Gary and Ann since about here on the timeline. And as many of you know, Gary was fun-loving and adventurous. I'm going to read a little bit of some excerpts from a journal that he and Ann kept of the Virgins One sailing trip that I was on with them. And yet on that trip, somewhere in here, he says something about that people identified, the crew members came up with this idea of the G factor, and it meant the Gary factor, which meant that anytime Gary was involved, there was likely to be adventure also. I did a lot of different things with Gary and Ann, most of them centered around water. We did motorboating, sailing, took scuba lessons and went scuba diving together, snorkeling while in the Virgin Islands, and more recently, the pontoon boat out on Medicine Lake and swimming. Some of the highlights, as I mentioned, from the sailing trip, I'll see if I can do this and hold the microphone. One of the days, must have been February 2nd of the year that we were there. He said, if there are groundhogs here, they certainly saw their shadow. And these are all, I think the ones that I pulled out of here are all in Gary's handwriting. One of the days, it said that one of the J's, Joan and John were both on the trip, and he refers to people in here by their initials. So that's a J, and I'm not sure which one. But Jay and Gary cooked obese steaks for dinner that night in a raging gale. Only 49 matches were needed. We perfected the drop the matches through the hole in the top technique. Steve and I were the same. Ellen were the assigned cooks, and he went on and described some of the menu. On February 6th, he says, at sundown we were in Marina Key, and we're listening to the radio, and Radio St. Croix said, it's going to be a chilly one tonight. Lows will dip down to 68 to 73. So his sense of humor is apparent all through this journal. And he mentions earlier that night before dinner, we discovered Star Wars, which was Anne and one of the J's, I don't know if it was Joan or John, the story of their lives as told by their wounds. So I don't remember the details. Gary, as you know, Gary was very detail-oriented, and when I just mentioned recently, when I mentioned this journal, he said, you know, oh, we were at such and such a harbor, and this happened there, and I just couldn't believe that he would remember the details. One Sunday, he said, we had a breakfast bonanza, bacon, scrambled eggs, and either Pearson cakes or pan clunks. Steve Pearson was one of the sailors on that trip. Oh yeah, here's the line that some of the crew began totally unfounded rumors of the existence of what they dubbed the G factor. And he says it's total rot and balderdash. We had lots of, as you know, Gary enjoyed music, and we had lots of rock and roll nights. Not necessarily musical, but we rocked to sleep in a boat. That was the phrase that got used. We spent a lot of time on that trip trying to find ice. It was amazing that, you know, almost every day in the journal we went for ice. Sometimes we got rid of some garbage, but we went for ice. And that particular day we had an intense bout of collective decision-making on where to go for the day. That was one of our big decisions each day. So, we had a lot of fun. I've enjoyed a lot of good times with Gary and Ann. And a couple of the things that I'll always remember is his kind of, I don't know what the right word is for it, but his meticulous nature of, he liked to cook, and when he was preparing a piece of fish or something to put on the grill, he just was shaking spices over. I mean, it was like he needed to have every little bit of spice in the exact right spot. And he was just so totally focused on that. And another thing he focused on that I remember very well is that he studied the newspaper. He read, I believe, the whole newspaper every day. and we used to tease him that he was studying for his final exam. And unfortunately, he didn't get to read the newspaper for the last week or so of his life. So I hope there weren't too many current events on the final exam. Otherwise, he surely passed.
And now Mike's friend, colleague, and my husband, Mike McElway.
You may be able to tell from my accent that I'm not from here. I'm from two places. I'm from New Jersey on the East Coast and California on the West Coast. I spent over 30 years in each of those places before coming here. And the reason is sitting here in front of me. And one of the first people I ran across here was Gary. And I was kind of struck by him because he just, I couldn't quite get a handle on him. So I started paying attention here and there, and these are some few observations. So, when I came, I play guitar. Well, I sort of flog a guitar. And occasionally I do something that kind of resembles playing. And Gary, of course, plays the guitar quite well, and the violin. So fiddle. Fiddle, yes. To be precise. Which,
The difference between
a violin and a fiddle? I have no idea. I have enough trouble with the guitar.
a violin has 4 strings, a fiddle has 4 strings. That was Gary's favorite joke.
So, my impressions of Gary, and they were consistent from the start, was that he was, first of all, quiet. He was a quiet guy. He could just sit, and you wouldn't see or hear anything from him, and it was hard to tell if he was doing anything at all. But he really was observing everything around him. I've seen him sit in his living room and watch a bird hop around his backyard for 20 minutes. And it didn't bother him a bit to do that. That would make me a little nuts, to be honest. Not Gary. So, for someone like me who tends to be a little disorganized, sometimes very disorganized, and not always able to catch up on what I need to remember, Gary was a quiet, patient, observant, kind person. And that's the thing, I think that's necessary. That was certainly necessary for me because there was no tension or stress around Gary. See, you just went with Gary's flow, and if you did that and paid attention, you benefited from it. It was just kind of magical and effortless, which is sort of the magic of it. Some details, 2 pairs. The one thing that I think hooked us together was music. Gary was really good at music, and I was not, especially. I was really pretty amateurish. I could keep rhythm and so forth, and I had a decent guitar, and if I worked at it, I could rise to a level of proficiency that was decent, at least. And I had an okay voice, so that went along with covering up a lot of the not quite so great guitar work underneath. Gary, on the other hand, was really patient. 20 minutes watching a bird, he could do that with people too. And then do something to tell them about it and help them out. And I got the benefit of that here and there. It's just kind of an odd and wonderful benefit when it comes along. He got me, I wanted to improve my guitar play. And so his answer was, well, you gotta play more. And I said, well, okay, what have you got in mind? And so the next thing I knew, he was starting to hook us into groups that went and played in rest homes and clinics and places where there were people who couldn't get away because they and it worked pretty well, actually. So he also brought me to a concert hall at one point, which scared the bejesus out of me, to be honest, because I was nowhere near thinking I was should be anywhere near a concert hall, let alone out of the cheap seats and on the stage. But I went there once. I think it was part of a rehearsal for something, and it was just too scary. So I didn't join that group. But I asked if he would let me come by his house once a week or maybe once every other week, depending on if he was busy or not, and play with him so we could have a jam, kind of a jam session, just so I could get better and approach his level. And he said yes. And so I would trot from once a week from my home out near White Bear Lake over to Medicine Lake, and we would do some work in his living room with guitars, and gradually the repertoire built up. Of course, he never stopped building the repertoire. I just had this thin sheaf of stuff. He had this binder that was packed. So, but it was just a pleasure to do that, and I got a lot better. So I must say, it was a big win for me, and I hope he got something out of it too. I really do. Mainly, we got to share a bunch of songs, and we could do a harmony piece here and there and then. So that was always terrific. Always terrific. Okay. So we became friends around music, really. I think for me that was the binding between us, was music. And it's pretty hard to think of something better than that. And it was certainly a very special thing for me. Now, let's see. The thing that drew me to Minnesota was love, and it took quite a while, but eventually love triumphed and marriage happened instead of the usual lustful stuff going on endlessly. And Gary was my best man. So, and a better best man there wasn't. took me around to every place he could think of while he was trying to get my skills up on the guitar. Every place he could think of. And they included concert halls, restrooms, hospitals. Restaurants? Restaurants? Sorry. Rest homes, not restrooms. Oddly, I can picture that every I think, and so he had let me come in and we would play quite a lot, and it happened quite often. And I think it benefited both of us a bit, but I think it benefited me a whole lot more. But Gary was just the Gary that's been described so far. He was very consistent, he was quiet, not really self-effacing, but very settled in himself. He was patient and kind, never a harsh word, except once in reference to a motor issue on the pontoon boat. And he might even have apologized to the pontoon boat for that. I think that's pretty much it. I have never had an experience quite like being Gary's friend. So, thank you. Thank Gary.
And now we'll have Mary Lang and Karen Greer, who are longtime colleagues and friends of Gary's.
It was really a privilege to work with Gary. Not only Karen, but Sandra Hirsch, who was here, several of us were the leaders of an organization that were focused on understanding the differences of personalities and how using tools that pointed that out could help people understand themselves better, build better communities. And so we met as an organization at least once a month, 9 months for years. And behind the scenes, Gary was one of the leaders of the organization, and we all, chipped in, but he was always there. And I think one of our colleagues who's not here tonight, David Pretty, who was a member of the team, when I sent him a notice that Gary had died, sent this just short little quote. I do miss his quiet ways of organizing and typing folks and issues. And to that, I have to agree, because I'm probably not that calming a person. And Gary had, when we would have discussions that would get vigorous and, we'd have differences of opinions, he'd just sort of be sitting there, and all of a sudden, he just sort of, he didn't even notice that he was sort of moving us all together. And by the end of the time, we had agreement, an actionable plan that we all pitched in and did something about, and it was a wonderful way to work. It was really an honor to do that. Some of the things I really remember about Gary is he was a good listener, and I could call him about any detail of anything that wasn't quite in place, and we would just talk through it. But the other thing is he was such a playful thinker. He could get quirky but brilliant ideas out of him, just in this quiet sort of, happened to think of this way. And behind all of this, one of the other attributes of Gary that I think was a great strategist. He did know how to get us from where we were, where we said we wanted to go. And I think a whole bunch of organizations whose members belong to our type organization really benefited from the fact that he really saw that they got the skills they needed to take back to their communities. And not only was it a joy to work with Gary, one of the things we shared was a love of food. And lunch meetings were one of his very favorite things to do. And so frequently we would be having a conversation on the phone and it would be like, oh, we should really get together for lunch. And there was this one time I just remember, it was a summer and we were going down near St. Anthony on Main, noonish, and all of a sudden there was just this horrendous downpour. And both of us ended up, by the time we got to the restaurant, absolutely soaked. And we just sort of giggled at that, sat and watched the rain just streaming by and got all of our work done at the same time, which is one of those things that always seemed to be true of Gary. That and the fact that he liked to take us all out of the boat. He would bring the entire steering team out so we could have a boating adventure. And he was always great when we were out of town at something, of getting us wound up and off to someplace to have dinner. One time was with Ann. We went, I can't even remember who else was there, but it was in Baltimore, and we went out for all-you-could-eat crab. Oh my. And with that, I will turn it over to Karen, who also has worked with him for several years, and she'd love to be.
Yes, Gary. Well, as Mary was referencing, he was, and as you mentioned about the planning team also, one of those stalwarts that just kept us going and kept on keeping on. And we were a series. We would plan events, we would plan workshops, we would plan meetings, and Gary was always there. And the part I'm loving about this gathering is that, one, the sense of humor that you all saw so readily with him. And the other part is his music, which I never saw in Gary. We didn't have any, Myers-Briggs type musical kind of events. We just didn't, kind of thing. But there are two things I want to say specifically about Gary. I left the Myers-Briggs organization in 2010 because of other things that were in my life and that I needed to do. And about 5 years after that, he called me unexpectedly, and he said, things are changing here, and would you like to go out to lunch thing? And I'd like to just share with you about what's happening. Our local organization is closing down. And you've been a member, I was in Myers-Briggs since the 80s, and you've been a member for a long time, and I'd just like to kind of update you. So we went to Macy's at Ridgedale, and I so appreciated the thoughtfulness of him, wanting to update me and help share with me what was happening, and what had happened and how it was going and all of that. So that was a fun time, and so-and-so was doing this and so-and-so was doing that, and all of that. I appreciated his time and his thoughtfulness with that. The second thing I'd like to share with you is Ann and Gary would go out ballroom dancing every now and then. Imagine that. And I would run into them at the Eisenhower Community Center. And so, we would chat briefly, and that sort of thing. I'm not sure if Gary and I ever danced together, but we would chat and visit and all that. So in April of this year, Gary and Ann were there again. And I just, we chatted and whatever, and then all of a sudden he came up to me. We were standing on the side of the ballroom floor, next to the tables, and he said, "Karen, I just want you to know that I have been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And the doctor is really quite hopeful. And yet it's still the journey with cancer. And I just wanted to share that with you. And I was so impressed with his willingness to be so open to me. You know, I hadn't really, connected with him in the recent past. His openness and his willingness to be vulnerable. I have this disease. And so I felt honored, that he was willing to do that. And I do remember saying, and my thoughts are with you, we were able to connect on that level. So the part that I remember about Gary is his steadiness, his patience, and his thoughtfulness. And again, I'm going to say, his steadiness, his patience, and his thoughtfulness. And I'm just glad to be part of this remembering and learning more about him, actually, And so I thank you for this evening, Catherine, and all those who are planning, because it does say a lot about that man named Gary Fleishacker.
We're now going to move into the music part of our program. And as we do that, I want you to know that this is Gary's guitar up here. And Nicholas Fries is Gary's grandson, and he is going to lead us in the singing of the song that is on the back of your program. Well, apparently I'm going to help too. So we'll see how this goes. Oh, God's children, place in the choir. Some sing low and some sing higher. Sing out loud on the telephone wire. Some just clap their hands or pause or anything they got now. Listen to the bass, there's one on the bottom. The bell dog throat and the hippopotamus moans and groans with a big do-to-do. The old cow just goes smooth. The dogs and the cats they take up the middle. The honeybee hums and the crickets fiddle. The doggy grays and pony neighs and the old coyote howls. All God's critters got a place in the choir. Some sing low, some sing higher. Sing out loud on the telephone wire. Some just clap their hands as long as they're anything they got now. Listen to the top where the little bird sings. The belly in the high voice ring. The moon hours and everything. And the jaybird disagrees. Nighttime singing in the day. The little duck quacks and he's on his way. The possum never got much to say. And the porcupine talks to herself. All God's critters got a place in the choir. Some sing low, some sing higher. Sing out loud on the telephone wire. Some just clap their hands as pause or anything they got now. Here's part of the land. We all get to play in the great critter band. From the eagle in the sky to the whale in the sea. There's one great symphony. All God's critters got a place in the choir. Some sing low, some sing higher. Sing out loud on the telephone wire. Some just clap their hands, pause or anything they got now. Critters got a place in the choir. Some sing low, some sing higher. Sing out loud on the telephone wire. Some just clap their hands or pause or anything they got now. And now we'll invite up Gary's son-in-law, Pastor John Fries.
Good evening. He's asked me to read a short passage from the Bible and to pray for us. We are reading from Ecclesiastes tonight. Ecclesiastes, you may know, was written by Israel's wisest king named Solomon, and it's a book where he tries to figure out life. That's the question he's asking. What is life about? Why are we here? What are we supposed to be doing? And what does all this mean anyhow? That's Ecclesiastes. If you want to know what he concludes, you have to read clear at the end of the book, where he says the purpose of man is to fear God and keep his commandments. But we're not reading there, we're reading in the middle, where he's still trying to figure out life. And one thing he's wrestling with is time and the relentless progress of time that just keeps moving forward and forces us to deal with things like the reality of mortality. So we're reading Ecclesiastes 3 tonight, just a little chunk, but it's a very apt text for the season. Starting in verse 1. To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep, a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. If you'll allow me, I'd like to pray for you. If you'd like to, you can pray with me. Lord God Almighty, maker of the heavens and the earth, you teach us how to pray in your book of Psalms, and this is one of those prayers. I love the Lord because he heard my cry. Because you have heard my cry for mercy, I will love you all of my days. So Heavenly Father, I ask that tonight you would hear this cry. I come before you through the work of Jesus Christ on the cross, his death and his resurrection, and I ask this in his name. I ask that you would give mercy to us who are mourning, and that you would show grace to us who grieve. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
And now we'll invite up Nicholas Breeze again and Natalie. And they're going to sing an Irish folk song for us called Parting Glass. They're his grandchildren.
Oh, the times that ere I spent it in good company, and any harm that e'er I've done, I trust it was to none but me. May those I've loved through all the years have memories now they'll ever recall. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night and joy be to you all. Oh, the comrades that e'er I had are sorry for my going away, and all the loved ones that e'er I had would wish me one more day to stay. But since it falls unto my lot that I should leave and you should not, I gently rise and I'll softly call. Good night and joy be to you all.
to recall. Please fill to me the parting glass. God bless and joy be to you all. And when you sit and stories tell, and when fond memories you recall, please fill to me the parting glass. God bless and joy be to you all.
I'd like to ask you to all join me in holding a hand to our hearts as we say goodbye. Gary, we bless your memory with great love for you have written your love upon our hearts. Go your way in peace, and may your memory be a blessing to all who knew you. Thank you so much for coming tonight. As we close this off, Tammy Priest, Gary's daughter, is going to play a song, a Shokin Farewell. Some of you know this beautiful song. Gary was learning it on his fiddle, and it's the fiddle that his grandfather Odie had. And so Tammy will play this for us as we get up, and there's all sorts of refreshments back here for you, or you're free to obviously mill around and enjoy each other in Gary's name and to look at these beautiful hangings and the pictures that are here. So thanks very much for coming.